Welcome to Concept to Creation, a podcast featuring entrepreneurs who share their business journey. We'll hear what motivated them to turn their dreams into a business. They'll share stories from the trenches of business, from raising capital, creating products or services, navigating regulations, hiring employees, and managing competition and growth. We'll discover their successes and failures, and they'll provide advice for budding entrepreneurs. Now, here's your host and fellow entrepreneur, Mike Conrad.
Welcome to another episode of the Concept to Creation podcast. I'm so glad you're with me today. My guest today is Christine Davies. She is the founder and CEO of Polygage. Christine has built her 20-year career around the intersections of public and private sectors, with leadership roles in the government, business, technology, and not-for-profit sectors. Many of you who are just starting your company might feel like you're in the not-for-profit sector, even though you don't intend to be. But at any rate, she's worked in the for-profit and non-for-profit sectors, both in the United States and internationally. Christine is currently a member of the Business 20, or B20, task force on employment and education during Italy's G20 host year, and she was also selected as a member of the Mindshare class of 2021, a forum of startup CEOs across the Washington, D.C. area. Christine most recently served as Vice President for Partnerships at the Asia Society, and she previously worked as a Business Development Manager within the Public Sector Services Division at Microsoft. Earlier in her career, Christine served at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative and U.S. Department of State, where she worked on a variety of global and economic and development issues as the International Trade Specialist at the American Chamber of Commerce in Thailand. Christine earned her MBA from the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business and her undergraduate degree from the University of Maryland at College Park. So Christine, welcome to the Concept to Creation podcast. So thanks so much for being my guest today.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be with you and all of your viewers and listeners.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you're here. I have a lot of questions that I'm eager to ask you. But before we get into Polygage and what it does, we did read your bio. It's an extremely impressive bio. You've woven through all sorts of businesses, both nationally, internationally, large and small. It's quite an impressive business career and political career, for that matter. But give me the kind of the color commentary beyond what I've already read. Your experience. A lot of people have experience and they don't jump into the cold end of the deep pool and start their own business. So what was the motivating factor to start your own business? And tell me a little bit about the journey that led you to that motivating factor.
Yeah, of course. I have tried to squeeze as much out of, the years as I've been able to and kind of continue to do that. That's one of my governing philosophies, make the most out of the time that we have. But I think, what Polygage really sort of originated from initially was that I'm a native of the Washington, D.C. area. I've been interested in the government and politics realm since I was a child. My father was a civil servant with an intelligence agency. I've had teachers my whole life who've really pushed civics, as an area of study. I chose to major in government and politics at the University of Maryland. And I've actually had a chance now to be engaged in government activity at all levels. I interned with the Maryland State Senate when I was in high school. As you've mentioned, my first jobs out of college were with two real global federal government agencies. And because of the global nature, of those departments and agencies, I've had the opportunity to be engaged with capitals all over the world, have traveled to them, have met with them, in the United States, et cetera. And I think that definitely leaves an impression and built just continued to build my interest and my exposure, if you will, to the way that the government, the political and the policy worlds tend to work. The pivot to business really came out of, my observation when I was still working within the public sector about the different roles, that the public and private sectors really have in our society. From my experience, the government or the public sector, they're really laying down the yard lines, they're writing the rule books, they're refereeing the games, but it's the private sector that's on the field running plays and scoring points. And I really decided that I wanted to be on the field. So I pivoted and got my MBA, as you've mentioned, after my government service. I had a great sales and marketing experience with Microsoft and executive roles with some other organizations. And all of that, experience led to Polygage, which at the core, again, is my attempt to solve a big pain point for the private sector when it comes to public policy and regulation. But it really has taken kind of the full mantra, of my career to get to this point, to learn the things that I've learned, to see the things that I've seen, and to then, really have the confidence to do what I'm trying to do now.
Awesome. I always try and I always find company names interesting, particularly like a name like Polygage, and I try and decipher. I get out my little decoder ring and I try and decipher. So I'm going to take a stab at it. We have not rehearsed this before. Political engagement.
Yes.
It is. Okay, good.
Policy and political engagement.
Policy. So okay, yeah, there we go.
80% there.
Okay, very good. I feel very proud of that. That's going to go on my scoreboard.
Thank you for getting it. Yep.
People start new businesses for a variety of reasons. Some people like me, when I started my business, I saw someone doing something kind of similar, but they weren't doing it very well. In my opinion, they were doing. It was kind of a dorky attempt at something, and I thought, they're so close, but they're so far. And Steve Jobs, he was famous for inventing things, but in reality, he was an exploiter, and I mean that in a complimentary way. He took technology that was used for other purposes, and he said, I see a greater purpose for this technology. And he was able to bring things that were meant for copy machines, like the GUI interface and the mouse, and he was able to adopt those for wider consumer use. So some people start a business because they see an opportunity to do it better, and some people start a business because they see an opportunity to do something nobody is doing. What was, in your world, what was your motivation? Was it one or the other, or something different, or both?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think for me, it's largely the latter, because as I know we'll get into, it's largely the unique business model and the use of technology that Polygage has brought to the table for the government and public affairs industry that's really been missing, over the past, really the history of the industry, but especially over the past 20 years as we've seen technology and the efficiencies and transparency that technology can provide revolutionize other industries. And I think, that's probably true because the reality is the government affairs industry, has been around since the days of, when President Ulysses S. Grant was sitting in the Willard Hotel, and that's when lobbying was born. That was really when the industry kind of gained its footing. So it's an industry, it's a business in a sense that's been around for a long time. But we really looked at it and thought, it's in some ways, it's something that we think we can provide a better, experience through our service in attacking or in doing, especially in an industry with such a long legacy of activity. And it's nothing that, as far as we've seen, other companies are really trying to do, in this industry.
Yeah, very, very good. So I recall 29 years ago when I started my company, I never experienced cash exiting my bank account faster than my first year in business. It was just that suction, there it goes. And I think you're just past your first year in business. Are you 2 years old yet, your business, or are you?
We launched last May, so we're about a year and a half.
A year and a half.
So we're still an infant.
Yeah, you're still in the infancy stage. So how did you? I don't want to get too personal, but just kind of in a generic sense, how did you get your business funding? Do you have investors? Did you shake down the couch for loose change? What was the motivation, or not the motivation? What was the vehicle that said, okay, now's the time?
Yep. Well, you're so right. There are definitely a lot of people when you're an entrepreneur who want to help you spend money and try to convince you that, their product or service is the way that you're going to get from 0 to 100 in a matter of days. After I was done shaking out the couch cushions, I really bootstrapped my first year of operations. And quite frankly, that was also some time that I took prior to launching in May to get things, situated, to get oriented to the real pain points of the government and public affairs industry to develop our initial technology. So I gave Polygage a loan, out of my savings without an expectation of repayment. But I think that's a very wise way to kind of explore your bootstrapping in those early days. And then I did go ahead and raise funds through what are known as SAFE agreements. So simple agreement for future equity, which I know folks can Google if they want to learn more. But essentially, it's a way that your earliest investors get promised future equity when your company has an event that values the company, whether that's through a formal valuation that may happen in a future investment round, or if there's an exit event even before you have to raise venture capital or that sort of funding, and you end up certainly exiting with a valuation. So I've been able to raise just north of about $500,000 from those SAFE rounds. And I've targeted doing so just from friends and associates at this point. I've actually had a red line in my mind and I guess in practice about raising money from family because I don't want the holidays to be awkward, but also because I really wanted to raise funds from people who knew the government affairs industry and were on the same page of recognizing the pain points and the pain that we were trying to solve with Polygage, because they've ended up not just being fantastic, capital contributors, but they've also been great idea contributors. They've been great sounding boards for me to turn to when I've had questions or problems that I've wanted to get some perspective on. And so I feel really good about that approach so far. And from a risk perspective, I work hard every day because I want to get my investors a return. But I do have to say it's nice knowing that I don't have a looming capital call event, interest rates that I've got to be paying, et cetera. So a SAFE agreement, that approach has worked really well for us to date.
I love that. I'd never heard of a SAFE agreement before, and I'm not sure if my audience has or not. Maybe I'm the last person in business to hear of that, but it's kind of a funny name, SAFE agreement, because it may not be as safe as it would appear, but it probably is one of the more dicey investments, but one of the most rewarding if it pays off, right? Just like risk reward. There's always a ratio between risk and reward. Vegas figured that out a long time ago in Atlantic City and all that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think for investors who, if you're looking to get, your 10%, annuity or whatever it might be, there's other ways to do that. If you're looking to hopefully get in early on something that has, what I certainly hope will be a 10 to 100x, at least return for my investors. It's a great way to do it. And don't feel bad. It's not a long-standing agreement. It actually came out of our friends at the Y Combinator in Silicon Valley not too long ago. But it is a vehicle that a lot of us, I think, are trying to use now because, the truth is it doesn't require the entrepreneur or the startup to hold much of the risk. So I guess to your point, it's a little safer for us.
Yeah, right, and more rewarding if it pays off, right? So, and it actually probably increases the odds of paying off because my experience when I finally got to the point where a bank realized I was human and I was a business, which doesn't happen right away because in order to borrow money you have to prove you don't need it, and that's the dichotomy of a bank. But I probably spent several years in my business running the business to please the bank. Right. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you can change the word bank for investor, for venture capitalist, for, whatever. When people loan you money, they want it back. And the key to keeping that line of credit open is to have favorable numbers. I probably paid more taxes than I owed because, I probably was a little bit more creative to show more earnings than. Well, let me put it this way. I don't want to give the impression I was a tax cheat. I actually, the other way, I paid more taxes because I did not take advantage of the many tax mitigation strategies I could have, because that would have lowered my perceived income and that would have made the bank unhappy. So I think when you chase investors, if that is the number one thing in your field of view, you don't necessarily make best decisions for the company. You make best decisions for your investors, for the bank. And
I think
So your SAFE agreement, people who are willing, the operative words are future equity, right?
Right.
These are people that have patient money, and they're not looking for a a cadence for a timeline of payments, right? This is a risk, and they're probably savvier with their investments, and this is probably money that they don't mind risking for a future return, not an immediate return.
Listen, I think you're touching on a couple of things that are so important, for anyone listening or watching who's thinking about starting a business, which is that number one, the more you have the ability as an entrepreneur to stay focused on the work of the business, which is revenue, 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 product development or service development in pursuit of revenue, 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 customer acquisition, revenue, 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 the better off you are. Operations should be a minor spend of time. Ideally you can, whether it's staffing or outsourcing to manage, a lot of those elements, but, needing to be vigilant for sure on things like finances and legal and, other issues that certainly, factor into how we potentially launch and then run our businesses, but trying to minimize the distractions, that can come from what I've already repeated, the R word 20 times, keep an entrepreneur from doing. It's just so important. And I think too, I got this counsel early in my entrepreneurial journey, and I've really valued it, which is that if you're in a position, which you hope to be in, where you can really be considerate about the types of investors that you can take on, that is the best position to be in. Don't take money just because it's there. Really evaluate what that relationship, with that investor or contributor is going to look like, because I have heard so many horror stories, I'm sure you have too, of people that end up really partnering with investors who, if they're not aligned, with your vision of the business, sometimes that's good. They can teach you a few things given their experience, but sometimes it can just make, the daily experience such hell that there's no way you're ever going to get the return, that they are expecting to see. And that just, that ends up really, I think, hijacking the journey that you're trying to make a success. So, we're not all fortunate enough to be selective in terms of where we get our capital, but I just think it's important for entrepreneurs to be thoughtful as they consider those options.
I remember once, many years ago, I had an employee come up to me. We were probably in business 15, 16 years at that point. So we were over the hump. We weren't going out of business tomorrow. For the first couple of years, we kept thinking this could be the last day, right? And then we'd survive another day. But we were past that. And he came up and he said that he wanted to buy into the company. And I'm like, why? We're privately held. I famous or staunchly privately held, right? I don't want any other chefs in my kitchen, right? I do treat our team as partners, not in an equity sense, but in many other senses. But and he was all bent out of shape because I politely declined, and I told him, I said, the time to invest in a company is when the company needs the money, when the banks are saying no, that's the time that you offer money. You don't wait and sit on the sidelines and then cheer when they're winning. You show confidence before the game starts and early into the game, before you know how it's going to go. That is the risk and the reward. There can't be a reward if there's no risk. If Vegas had a game where you had a 99% chance of winning, not going to be very big odds on that, right? So at best even money. So that was an interesting conversation, and then I realized I probably sounded like a jerk. I probably sounded arrogant, but I just I was personally offended by someone wanting a stake in the company and its returns after the battles were fought. It's like, it's a little late to become a fan now,
I hear you. I can appreciate that. And I think, quite frankly, I will, be so just, we're not supposed to, be as emotional in business. It's just business. We're supposed to kind of keep to the books, but I really will be grateful to my earliest investors for really taking a risk on something that at the point that I approached them, for safe agreement capital, it really was just a vision. We didn't have a website at that point. We didn't even really have a business plan put together. but they so believed, in the vision of what we're trying to do with Polygage. And, I think to some degree, they were committed to, my capabilities and what they thought I would be able to do. I know that investors will tell you they're often investing in the entrepreneur as much as they are in the business idea.
Absolutely.
And so I'm so grateful for that. And you're right, for any investors that are listening or watching, they've got to pick their shots carefully too.
Absolutely. So. Yeah. I do think, you say this, don't get emotions in business. I do think there is plenty of room in business for gratitude. And I wouldn't even call gratitude an emotion. I think gratitude is it's a human reaction to something. And I think, I have so much gratitude for the people who believed in me, particularly in the early days, and for the challenges that I faced. I wasn't very grateful in the moment for the challenges. I'm like, oh God, why now? Why me? What did I do wrong? But now I look back. So normally when I talk to entrepreneurs on this show, it's closer to the end of their journey than the beginning of their journey. And I talk to them about all the things they learned, and particularly the early years, which you're in right now. So you're a little bit of a time machine, because you are in those early years. You're experiencing them in real time. Many of the entrepreneurs I talk to reminisce about the early years, but a lot of the pain and a lot of the suffering and a lot of the worry, a lot of all that has kind of polished off over time and become a little smoother. And almost without fail, every single entrepreneur I talk to, probably without fail, every single one I talk to looks back in those early years with nostalgia. They would not trade those difficult years for anything. And I feel the same way. It forged me, right? It made me a better business person. It made me a better human. And you don't feel that at the time, but it is for people. I'm a college dropout, and a lot of entrepreneurs follow that path for, I don't know, it's the way our brains are wired. We're probably just terrible employees. We don't like to follow instructions, so we can only work for ourselves. But, I think business itself is a unique MBA course, right? You can be smart about it and get your MBA before you exercise those skills, or you can pick up those skills on the fly. Either way, you're going to pay for an education, right? You're either going to pay with all the mistakes you make by not knowing and learning on your business dime, or you're going to pay, formally like you did. I think you made the smarter move, but now that you're in that growth phase, you're in the phase that many business owners look back on with nostalgic, fond memories and say they are grateful for the challenges. Do you feel like you're within that challenging time? And do you feel that that the journey is harder than you expected it to be, exactly what you expected it to be, easier than you expected it to be? Give me a gauge on where you are. I know you don't have a point of comparison because your business isn't 30 years old, but based on what you know now and your experience with business and other businesses that you've had in the past, how do you rate yourself in the middle of this growth, the early part of growth?
Yeah, no, I think, first of all, just what you just said is just further proof that there's no one path, right, into entrepreneurship and startups. And, just to point out, Bill Gates dropped out, or I think he dropped out of Harvard, right? He didn't get his college degree either. And thank God, I think Microsoft has made a lot of great contributions, and he started that business obviously then pretty young. But then we have Jeff Bezos, who, laid more kind of paving stones in his career through consulting and finance and that sort of thing before launching Amazon. So, whether, the folks that are reading and listening have followed your path, Mike, or maybe they followed more of mine. There certainly are gateways and on-ramps into this realm, for everybody. And that's I think something that's exciting. You're exactly right. It's hard for me to say, is this journey what I expected it to be? I tried not to have many expectations, because I just knew that I was kind of, I'm big on analogies and visualizations. And I kind of felt like I was standing on the edge of a forest or a jungle. that I knew that despite my education and my work experience, I had never been in before, right? And so I thought I was armed with the tools and the survival skills, and that sort of thing.
That's the ultimate we're not in Kansas anymore moment, right?
Yeah, and I was ready to head in. And then it quickly turned more, I feel like the experience is like trying to climb a rock wall. And you spend your days just looking for that next hold, to move to as you're trying to get up the wall. And some days you may slip a bit, and some days you find, a slew of holds in succession. And so you're climbing a little more quickly, for that element of the rock face. I think like many entrepreneurs, I really thought that the day that we launched, we were going to be a true overnight success. And it turns out, we have been achieving our successes and our holds, throughout this journey, as I mentioned, now 18 months in. But I have to smile when I think of, I'm continually seeking, counsel and just guidance from people who've been there, done that from an entrepreneurship or a startup perspective. And one of them said, Christine, in startup world, 5 years is like an incredibly impressive overnight success. You've been at this for 18 months. Please, just be glad there's still a rock.
Right.
And you're still holding on. So
it's like Yogi Berra. It's like a Yogi Berra line. I can picture him saying it takes years to be an overnight success. That's maybe he did say that, but you're right. I mean, overnight is measured in dog years, not in human years.
I think that's a great point. And, so I guess for me, I knew it was going to be hard. I knew it was going to be different from any of the other experiences I'd had before. But I will say, going back to the point just a few minutes ago about emotion, I am living with my decisions day in and day out, right? I mean, the buck stops with me with everything that we do. And that can be stressful. I mean, there's no one else to point a finger at. There's no one else to, slough off, some of the big decision making too. I'm grateful that because of the investment we've been able to raise and the revenue we've been able to earn, I've got a terrific young woman who's working for me. And then we have a number of consultants who do various things for us. But at the end of the day, it's on my shoulders. And that means you are fully engaged and there's not a lot of opportunity for other distractions. And so, the commitment level that is required for this is real. And I think something that needs to be understood by folks who are considering it.
So your business model is very interesting and impressive. Maybe not for the reasons that you think I would say, but one of the things I've noticed from my 30,000 foot view, right? I don't know your company intimately, but one of the things I picked up on is you mentioned that your seed capital was about $500,000, which is very impressive. I also saw a video of you talking about that your company is giving away. Is Operation Hope the right?
Yes, wonderful partner, wonderful organization.
Your operation is giving away $500,000 worth of in-kind services.
Yep.
You're giving away basically the same value as your startup capital. I also see on your website or your YouTube channel specifically that you have dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of power hour videos, as you call them, with experts and yourself giving away knowledge. Your company, I'm convinced your company will be successful in the world of, I don't want to get too metaphysical or spiritual or whatever, but your company is giving away valuable information. You're already partnering with people who will be your customer. You're paying it forward in a way that is extremely impressive for a young company. And to me, that tells me you have confidence in what your company does and what it offers. You're willing to serve your industry, whether or not they become a client. That is a huge investment to put out of goodwill, and it's unusual for a company, in its infancy, to just have a pay it forward kind of model.
Well, a couple of things on that, and I really appreciate you're taking the time to see some of the things that we're doing and trying to leverage as we grow. I would take the second point first. The Power Hour videos are largely a marketing tool and an awareness
Sure.
generating tool for us, because our business model, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little more depth, is we have a network at this point of 150 world-class firms from around the world, and in many cases multiple experts from each of those firms, in public policy and government and public affairs. They're available for very modular engagements, by which I mean 30 and 60-minute consultations. They're available for a one-off project. They're also available for more recurring services in the advisory and advocacy realm. And just like a product, you kind of need a test drive in some ways before you're going to put your credit card down. And so for us, you can certainly read their bios. We're very transparent, on our website. We make them all very searchable and filterable based on our knowledge attribute architecture. But at the same time, we wanted to give them a very low-cost way to show, what's in their brains and what their experience has brought to the table, so that it would be demonstrable, to our prospective clients. And ideally, we focused those Power Hour webinars on very, headline-oriented topics in the public policy and government affairs realm. So they also provide some education, to our prospective clients if they're at the end of the spectrum where they don't really know a lot about what's happening in government, and why that should be important to them and to their company. So you have that piece, and we hope it then spurs them to say, I really should talk to this person, and get a sense of what they're talking about kind of at a general level, how it specifically applies to me and to my company, and how we might be able to better engage to mitigate that risk or take advantage of that opportunity. So that is really the approach for why we made that content free, because we really wanted it to spur, sales. And I think that's an important aspect. I think that comes back to your fuller question is, anytime a company invests time in creating any sort of an asset, whether you choose to give it away, for free in terms of marketing or awareness generation, or you choose to sell it, what is your return, kind of trajectory? What are you thinking, might be possible out of that? On the Operation Hope point, and actually, I've volunteered to be an assist to a number of other organizations. They're a wonderful nonprofit which assists disadvantaged communities with financial literacy. They end up mentoring a number of, folks that would like to be entrepreneurs or small business founders, but aren't entirely sure of how to do that. And certainly, especially in those cases, local, regulation and government issues come into play. And so, we really think that paying it forward, creating good karma, but just being good corporate citizens, that's really an important part of just living a good human experience. And, I don't think everyone agrees with that. A lot of folks are very stovepiped. They see companies as generating economic value. And then if you want to do socially good things, there's other channels through which to do that. And I respect those leaders. That's the beautiful thing about our country, at least, is that we have those choices. I think for me, it's great to have Polygage's brand, aligned with the concept of, wanting to be helpful, wanting to help our clients succeed, solve problems, capitalize on opportunities. And so to your point, there's a lot of ways that companies can do that. And while the absolute goal is, financial success that allows us to have a longer term trajectory, I think there are a lot of different levers that companies can pull in the marketing, awareness, partnership, doing good, realm that really are good for the company in the whole.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We started a very similar philosophy of marketing about 7-8 years ago. We were in the marketing game. We were, braggadocious. We were, buy our machines, our pumps are better than their pumps, and this is better than that, and we're faster, and we're cheaper, and we're this and this, sexier, and then it just became apparent after 20 plus years of doing that. It just became noise. It was just noise, right? Everyone had a different frequency of noise, but it was just noise. So we changed to an educational model. One of the reasons I do these podcasts, I do several podcasts for our industry, is to educate the industry. And we produce webinars, technical webinars. We give a lot of advice, a lot of information away, not because we're a nonprofit organization or we want to be a nonprofit organization, but because it's a savvy marketing move because I believe educated people make educated choices. And we consider our company an educated choice. And I sell a product that most people think they don't need. Because I sell a product that used to be very common 30 years ago. And then technology changed and many people successfully got away from using our product. And now technology is getting so intricate, so small, miniaturization, all these things with electronics that people need our product again. But unless you're really old and been in this business for, more than 30 years, you don't remember the fact that people used to use products like ours. So it's a re-education. You're in a similar boat. And one of the questions I was going to ask you, and you kind of halfway answered it through, talking about the motivation to do all these power hour videos and things like that. But how do you go about selling a product that people they're not even aware that product exists? And I'm talking about being able to be connected to government leaders, being able to have a seat at the table to influence government decisions for the benefit of your industry or your business. I did not know there was short of hiring a lobbyist and playing with the big boys and big girls, I would never consider. I never knew there was a business that could give me a seat at that table. I know your business is more than that, but how do you go about selling people on something that I had no idea it existed?
Yeah, no, I think, and this is, what I'll talk about from a Polygage perspective, I think is true for any business where you're going to have a spectrum, of prospective customers. And they're all going to have varying degrees of knowledge, about the industry or the kind of segment that your product or service is trying to address. Some are already going to be power users and so are very inclined, to want to engage. And so you have a special, message for them about, we'll help, we're ready to meet you now and we can help you get to where you want to go faster. And then for those on the end of the spectrum, I think to your question that maybe aren't quite as knowledgeable or maybe even aware of that they have a problem that's percolating on the horizon and they should care and that your product or service, your company is a way to address it, you have a different approach, and really work on targeting that pool of customers. I would say in our case, our customers have a varying understanding of the importance of government affairs, really as a business competency. And I push, understanding and engaging in government affairs as being on the same level for companies as having a marketing capability or having a finance or operations capability. And the reason for that, I think it's also important from a, positioning your company and making sure you really do have some power to make a difference and to achieve the things that you're setting out to achieve, is that we have some really powerful statistics on our side to make a case to all of our prospective customers. Organizations like McKinsey, at least in our case from a B2B business and a professional services business, they do some terrific studies. They have access, of course, to thousands of executives around the world. And there's a study that I point to all the time from a Polygage perspective where they talk to hundreds, of top corporate executives. And they found that the business value at stake from government and regulatory intervention around the world, not just in the United States, but it's equal to roughly 30% of earnings for companies in most industries and 50% of earnings for those in the financial services sector because of the additional regulatory, burden and other policy issues that those types of companies face. I don't know an executive who isn't concerned about something that poses a risk to 30 to 50% of their earnings. And having that study, to share with folks who may be skeptics or don't really understand, government affairs, what really is it? Well, it's a business risk or it's a business opportunity. And what makes, our case even greater is that in that same study, only 20% of those surveyed executives said that they felt they had access to the resources that would help them mitigate, that massive earnings risk. So the door then opens when you share, really the intensity and the risk of the situation. In a bit, you're hopefully scaring people, a little bit about what's at stake in terms of this realm. That opens the door to a discussion about how Polygage can potentially help them, mitigate and navigate those risks that they face from government activity at all levels.
Let's scale this down a little bit and talk about small business. Small business is the backbone of the American economy. And but I'm not sure how many small business owners feel they have a seat at the government table. I have never, I'm almost 30 years in business. I'm still a small business, and, as the government would define it. And I've never thought that I could have a seat at the table. The closest to a seat at the table would be through one of my trade organizations who sends lobbyists, to Washington from time to time to talk about trade deals and tariffs and things like that. And based on trade deals and tariffs at the moment, I'm not sure they were all that effective. But so small business, I think a lot of us that operate a small business are just resigned to, we don't have a seat at the table. We'll just react to whatever silly things the government decides to do or good things the government decides to do. I should point out, my business started as a result of government regulation. We took advantage of that government regulation. We didn't fight it. We embraced it. And we created a segment in our industry that was a reaction to that government regulation. So I'm not saying government regulation is always good, always bad, but it always falls on one side or the other for one business or another business in terms of this is good, this is bad for them. But as a small business, we just kind of deal with it. We just either take advantage of it or change course and avoid that regulation. And it's like the bumpers in a pinball machine. We just get bounced off around it, but we still are committed to our journey. So how can small business feel like they have a seat at the table through Polygage or otherwise? Is it really Pollyannish to think that they can have a seat at the table, or can they really have a seat at the table for a price that is affordable? Obviously, if I had a $10 million to sway a public official, I would spend $10 million to sway a public official, but the small business owners clearly don't have those resources. So tell me how, in the small business world, how Polygage can work to their advantage.
100%. And I think, quite frankly, it's even more than the capital expense of being able to, write a fundraising check, which I know a lot of the cynics out there think is the only way to get involved in government and in politics these days. And I'm here to make a case that it's not true. I think trade associations, those types of bodies are great to get involved in. But, it's more that small business owners don't have time to sit at the table. So what they need to do is focus on getting messages, to those who are going to be spending the hours at the table, that they're too busy, thankfully, running their businesses, scoring points, running the plays, like I mentioned before, helping our economies and our societies. How can they make sure that their needs, that their interests, and that they're communicating the things that may be hurting them to elected officials and to regulators? What are the channels for that? I mean, certainly from a business, model perspective, we're trying to make it very modular, very tactical, so that companies that want to learn about an issue can get that knowledge and that information. We can help them assess kind of who the targets would be that would need to hear their story and need to hear, what's on their minds in terms of what's helping or hurting their company. And then they're able to, go about that engagement, whether it be direct engagement, whether it be coalition building or advertising. But, I think that the big thing is that it's not something that takes a lot of time and a lot of capital. Where we tend to be the most help, I would say, to small businesses is to really help them target where they should be present or where they should focus that time. And then it's a matter of communication. It's phone calls, it's letters, it's requesting a meeting. Again, letting government officials know where laws or regulations, are helping your business in terms, in particular, revenue and employment. Letting those regulators and those legislators know, what you're doing for the communities that they're representing and where you have a presence. Hosting them at your location, for tours and roundtables with your executives and your workers, really getting to know them proactively so that, they have a sense they will take your organization and its needs or have more familiarity with your industry so that when those table-wide conversations are occurring, you're sort of with them already, right? You don't have to necessarily be there because this is your only shot at getting your point in. You've actually been developing the relationships to get to be in their heads and to be with them all along. And again, I know plenty of businesses that don't write checks, but still have great relationships with their legislators and their regulators because they've devoted just a few hours a month to making sure that they're providing the types of updates, that they're really just proactively engaging, those members. And yeah, sometimes having to have a tough conversation. That doesn't mean the regulator or the legislator is always going to agree with you. And you may have to deal with some difficult things. And that's, again, where the trade associations or other coalitions can come in handy. And certainly services like what Polygage offers can help in those difficult or sometimes even crisis situations. But my counsel just returns to be proactive, get your list of targets and your messaging together, and just, lather, rinse, and repeat. I think that's something that we have to do in other aspects of our business. And it's the same for small businesses and, quite frankly, large businesses when it comes to government affairs as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a scaled up version of like being involved with your local chamber of commerce. I've been involved in the chamber over the years, and I have mixed feelings about it because I'm not a service that any one of the chamber members would ever consider buying. Right? So my motivation for being part of a chamber is not to sell to my fellow chamber members, right? If I was an insurance company, a realtor, a lawyer, an accountant, then sure, they're all potential clients, but not for me. But I when I was involved with the chamber, I did appreciate the tours, the site tours, the experts we would bring in to speak to our group, all of those things, which sounds like a much smaller version of what you're talking about. Be active, give tours, bring your city officials or your regulatory officials, if possible, to an event at your facility. Let them know who you are, so you're not just a business license number. You are a real person. Because when I meet people, when I make decisions on something, I calculate who I know. They're part of the decision process, or at least I see through a lens that incorporates the people I know. And the more people that the policymakers know, the more businesses they're experienced with, the more insightful their decisions are going to be, I would assume.
And I think the last point on that is it's really not good when a business or any organization shows up at the last minute and says, this regulation or this law is really, really hurting me, if they haven't been proactive in trying to develop, a solution previously. I mean, certainly that happens no matter how proactive or engaged we are. We don't always get our own way. But I think it can be very frustrating, if you don't take that time and then are upset with the end result. I mean, there's a million analogies we can think of from life, where that's applicable in a very simple way. You don't tell your family what you want for your birthday. Don't be surprised if you don't get it for your birthday. It's kind of the same sort of approach to things that happen on a government engagement scale too.
Yeah, I learned when I first started the business the whole philosophy of don't ask, don't get. So because
right.
At first you're a little embarrassed to ask, and then at some point, there's no humility left. When
That's
you're
right.
doing business. So you just ask for outrageous things, and you get some of them. So
one other point, if I could, Mike, I just
sure.
wanted to make on that last topic too. One of the other elements, you mentioned how technology has changed, certainly so much in the course of our lifetimes and obviously before that as well. There are a lot of information services out there. And so I'm asked a lot about, how a service like Polygage, differs from things that companies can get from, information services or intelligence or, the types of services that are supposed to help with predictive analytics and whatnot. And I always say that, those services are fantastic from kind of a one directional, kind of mass audience awareness perspective. They can let you know what's happening, out on the horizon, out on the battlefield or the playing field, depending on how you may be looking at it that day. Sometimes it feels like more of a battlefield. But then in terms of, the human intelligence element, being able to decipher whether it's what you're observing from an information service or maybe what you're hearing from a trade association or a chamber meeting, and trying to figure out how exactly is this relevant to me Or what exactly is my stake in what's happening? That's where the ability to connect with a human being at the end of the day, with an expert, with a firm, someone who really knows what they're doing because of their experience and the time that they've spent doing it and the lessons that they've learned. That's a special value add that I think we're trying to provide. And I think that you're seeing in a lot of services businesses that are trying to harness the best of technology to provide efficiencies and transparency and access and different, elements of that sort of technological edge. But then at the end of the day, it really is about the quality of who's behind the technology that's going to help you achieve what it is that you need to achieve to mitigate a risk or address a crisis or to be proactive effectively.
You single-handedly are totally ruining Ronald Reagan's old joke. He solicited quite a bit of laughter from his audience when he said, "Hi, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." So tell me how a typical company, I know there is not one type of typical company, but just maybe an example in the few minutes we have left, how working with Polygage through experts for a seat at the table, either literally or figuratively, can help a business. I know we're talking about having a seat at the table, government regulations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But give me like a takeaway from maybe a smaller company that had a problem, found a solution through an engagement with a company like yours.
Absolutely. So I'll share with you, kind of in a big picture, we have a variety of different clients who just want regular intelligence. They want the information that's been very customized, for their needs, whether that's, related to a state government or a local issue, whether it's something at the federal level or something at the global level. And so we've had clients who've wanted to know, what on the agenda of the Biden administration really has the possibility of impacting me, both for negative and for positive. I think folks forget it's not just about regulation. The government does provide a lot of, stimulus funding and research funding that can help companies achieve some of their R&D objectives and other elements. And so wanting to get a sense, through consultations or through memos about things that may be happening in that regard, things that are on the congressional agenda, or as I mentioned, things that are happening in a state government level, because a lot of federal money gets transferred to the states to then be distributed to companies and to citizens. And so it's important to really understand how the states that you have a presence in, are managing that and how you can best participate, if that's something that you want to participate in. And a lot of those companies don't want to be the ones aggregating all of this information from God, I don't know about you, but I probably get 50 different informational e-blasts a day, and there's other information services that I subscribe to. And so a company like Polygage can really help, focus on the wheat and not the chaff when it comes to what's happening from an activity perspective. We have other clients who really just need some initial research done or a jump start that they can then use to build off of. So a great example, we've worked with some startups, that are maybe looking to do pilots in different states or sometimes in different countries, and they're trying to assess where they're going to have kind of the quickest path to being able to launch or to do those pilots given different regulations in different cities or different states. We've also had companies who've come to us wanting assessments on the concept of ESG, which is probably a whole podcast we could talk about, and I know relevant to many, if not all, in the industry, the electronics industry. But sometimes needing a jump start about how do we think about what to measure and how to monitor and that type of thing. And then just one really specific example that we're especially proud of at Polygage is more in the government procurement lens. So companies that want to potentially sell into the government, we have a number of experts who can help with that. And there was a textile manufacturer down in the state of Alabama who during the COVID period, really wanted to pivot their manufacturing operations and start producing PPE. And while they had private sector channels that they could certainly sell into, with those products, as we all know, state governments and certainly the U.S. government was looking to procure as much of that stuff as they could get their hands on, especially if it was, made in the United States, which this client's products were 100% made in the United States, masks and gowns and other types
Wow.
of PPE. But they had no idea how to sell, in the state of Alabama, let alone outside of the state of Alabama and into the U.S. federal government. And so the short of it is they came to Polygage.com after hearing about us, thankfully, through some of the awareness generation that we had been developing. And they were able to work with, about a dozen different state government experts to get the lay of the land initially on, do you think we have an opportunity? What would it take? And then that sort of consultation progressed into more of a discovery project. And then eventually the experts were in the states in which they chose to pursue some procurement opportunities, helped them with the rest of the process to get their bids in and that sort of thing. The same with the federal government. I won't name names, but a large federal government agency that needed PPE for hundreds of their employees. This company was able to get the contract there. And it's something they simply wouldn't have had the knowledge, to do just in-house. Understandably, they were hugely successful with what they did, but this was a whole other realm that they wanted to break into. And then also, going with a traditional law firm or a traditional consulting firm where you're going to get put on a massive retainer and basically told, we hope we can get you some success, that just doesn't work. And
Right.
so I think the opportunity that Polygage poses, again, to be very a la carte. All 150 of our firms and experts are available on a per drink basis. You pay for a consultation, you pay for a project, you pay for an assessment, you can pay for, more recurring services if that's where the path leads you. But it becomes something that is just so accessible and tangible, to smaller businesses, or we're a great Swiss Army knife for larger companies that have a government affairs practice. But they're constantly telling me that they're playing the game of whack-a-mole, and there's always a new mole that's kind of popping up every week that they need to get some intelligence on or potentially engage on. And so the flexibility, that our company provides in the government and public affairs space, and it's largely because of our technology platform, the ability to make these experts discoverable and engageable so efficiently. That's the special sauce that we think we're bringing to the table, and that we can use to help, companies and organizations, trade associations, nonprofits. We've even worked with embassies, investors, et cetera. We think we can be really effective doing that.
Well, I love the level playing field that your services strive to provide, which is me as a small business can get just as detailed information and assistance on a small sliver of what I need. When you run a small business, you can't afford the whole plate, right? You're only eating appetizers. You're only eating, basically a tapas menu of selections on anything.
A lot of times you're eating leftovers. That's right.
That's true. Little microwave leftovers of tapas meals. So,
That's right.
And I don't think that has really been available before. Usually you have to hire a law firm or a lobbyist firm, and they're big, and they're, it's just the same with advertising agencies and things like that. You can't just go to a, Fifth Avenue advertising agency or Seventh, whatever avenue they're on, and run one ad in a local paper, right? And it sounds like your services are the equivalent of that. If you have one tiny splinter in your business, and you can hire an expert to identify that splinter and remove it. You don't have to have an entire surgical team,
Yeah.
to see. You said you were good with analogies. See, I love
that
analogies
analogy,
too.
Mike.
I love
I'm
analogies
taking
too.
that one.
All my
I'm
friends
taking
make
that
fun of
one.
me because I always come up with a response based on an analogy, and they go, "Well, here he
Yeah.
goes again." But
I love it. We can help with the splinters or with the whole log, and I will just make one other point, which is that on the, we're an online marketplace. So we've got our demand side in terms of our clients. And then of course the supply side. I've talked about these 150 firms with all of the related experts. They're very interested in participating in Polygage, not because they're struggling in business. These are all very successful advisors, consultants. I mean, many of our experts are previously elected officials. They've been diplomats. They've been government affairs executives in their own right. What they're interested in doing is being able to expand their reach, expand the constituents or the clients, really the clients, that they can help, and that they can do so in a way that, the business model needs to match what those clients are capable of participating. And, if you think of it like an iceberg, the companies to date that, to your point, have been participating in government and public affairs with these, white shoe firms, it's been a terrific business. That's been the above the waterline piece of the iceberg. And what I think an e-commerce approach and providing the ability to engage and transact, for all of those organizations that are below the waterline. And as we know, most of the iceberg is below the waterline. It's
That's
not
right.
above. It's a huge business
It wasn't the
opportunity.
iceberg above the waterline that sunk the Titanic. It was the
No.
iceberg below the waterline.
It was
that sunk the
90%
Titanic.
that was below.
That's right.
That's right. So we're excited to tackle both parts of the iceberg, the splinters and the logs. But I would say I think we have a huge opportunity with an element of the government, or really the business and organizational community, that isn't even participating in the government and public affairs realm because it just hasn't been accessible to them before.
Last question as we have to wrap up.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you what the future holds for Polygage. Now, when you ask someone who's fairly brand new in business what the future holds, it's to keep the doors open tomorrow, right? I'm not suggesting that's your case, but I remember back then, if someone were to ask me, what's the future? I'm like, I have no idea. It's survival, right? That was my case. But where do you see Polygage going, 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
5 or 10 years, I hope that we have really achieved, an incredibly, dynamic and the exponential curve in terms of our revenue growth. I hope that we're adding, 100 new clients to our rolls every month. We're able to achieve that level of, awareness and really just kind of speed of acquisition, and that we're returning, the profitability that we've pledged that we're chasing to our investors, that we're able to bring more investors on and just continue to scale. Where I'll tell you, I'd like to be probably 10 years or beyond. And maybe this is proof that I'm not, yet jaded. I'm still kind of enjoying this rock climbing journey. Is that I really think that Polygage can become a go-to platform, for companies and organizations looking to engage in government activity. I want to be the first place that they come, to look for an expert or look for an advisor who can help them. I want us to have the same usability of an Amazon in terms of our kind of, e-commerce marketplace approach. I want to enable the best experts in the world. We have a carefully vetted network. That's why we've really stuck to 150 to date, although we will continue to grow so we can cover more issues and whatnot. But, I really want that to be an efficient, transparent, fun, if I can. You rarely hear the term fun when it comes to government affairs and public affairs, but I want it to be a fun and really seamless journey for those companies and organizations to engage in something that, like I said earlier, poses tremendous business risk and opportunity. And we've got to level the playing field. We've got to bring more of these companies and organizations into this industry. It's a win-win for everybody to have more of their voices heard and to have voices heard more effectively. And sometimes even the big companies, just to make sure that they're able to ward off issues that can then impact, their hundreds or thousands of employees. It's important for them to have a voice as well.
Well, this has been quite enlightening and inspirational. So thank you, Christine Davies, for being my guest today. And I wish you, I don't think I need to wish you luck. I say that fairly regularly, but I mean it every time. I think you already have enough skill and enough momentum and enough drive and good karma to have a successful business.
Well, thanks, Mike.
It's also really inspirational to talk to a business owner who created something that did not exist before. That does not happen that often. Usually, as I said earlier, it's more evolution more than revolution. But this seems a little bit more on the revolution side. So I'll keep an eye on Polygage, and if my business needs some services, I'll certainly consider that as well. I've never even considered that before. because I didn't
Well,
think it was anywhere within my grasp. So
we've
it's nice
we've
to know.
got a consultation on your horizon, Mike. We'll plan for that when we get off this podcast. But thank you so much, and look forward to being of any service we can to be to you and your business, and certainly that of your viewers and listeners as well. Thanks so much for having me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for being my guest. And for our listeners and our viewers, if you'd like to get a hold of Christine Davies at Polygage, you can go to the show notes. If you're listening to this in the car, the treadmill, wherever you're listening to it, go to your podcast provider. That could be Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts. Look at the show notes and we'll have contact information for Christine. If you're watching this on YouTube, just look down, click the show more link, and you'll see Christine's contact information there. So again, Christine, thanks for being my guest. Viewers and listeners, I'll talk to you again very soon. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of the Concept to Creation podcast. If you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, please be sure and subscribe. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and virtually wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening to this in the car and you would like to see the video version of this as soon as you get home, as soon as you get back to the office, be sure and search for us on our YouTube channel, the Concept to Creation YouTube channel. When you're on the YouTube channel, be sure and hit the subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you'll be notified of new episodes as soon as they're released. We do release new episodes on the first and third Tuesday of each month. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks.
I was meant to be free.